Hello everyone. Today we are going to go over the Unit 6 review. We'll have our test over this topic tomorrow. It's about polynomials, but mostly factoring and simplifying. So that's what we're going to cover in today's review. We are going to do all of the odd numbers together, so hence the we do. And then I'm going to leave the even numbers, the I do, that means the student, for you guys to do and turn in for a grade. So let's look at number 1. It says simplify the expression. Anytime you see simplify, that means that you want to get this expression and you want to make it as short as possible. So when I look at an expression like this, the first thing that I see is those parentheses. We want to get rid of them, and the way we do that is by distributing whatever's right in front. So be careful with this one because it is a -2 because of that minus sign. So starting with, it has 5x, that's at the front, it's not next to the parentheses, so I'm just going to leave it the way it is. But now this -2, let's multiply it in. -2 times 6 is -12. -2 times -3, so be careful with that double negative, it becomes a positive 6x. And then that plus 11's at the very end, it's not in the parentheses, so nothing happens to it, but we're going to bring it down. Then at this stage, you want to combine like terms. So for instance, the two that I'm underlining here, they both have x. So I should put those together. So I have positive 5 plus 6. That would give me 11. And then got to keep that x. Okay, then these two here with the squiggle line underneath, those are what we call constants, where it's just a number with no variable next to it. So we're going to add those. We have -12 because of that minus sign, plus 11. That gives me -1. So now we're all done simplifying because that's as short as we can possibly make that. And there are different terms. This one has an x and this one doesn't. Okay, our next problem, number 3, tells us that they want us to multiply. So when you're multiplying binomials, each term of the first binomial needs to get multiplied by each term of the second binomial. So I taught this 2 ways. You could do double distribution where you get that first term and multiply it, and then the second term and multiply it, or you could do box method. So just for the example here, I'm going to use box method. Box method is, you have to draw the box. I'm going to make it have 2 rows because that first binomial has 2 terms. So I'm putting that 2m plus 5 here down the side. And then it also needs to have 2 columns because the second binomial has 2 terms. So 3m minus 4. Okay, now what we do is we multiply corresponding row and column. So like up here in this top box, we need to multiply that first row and first column. 2 times 3 gives me 6, but then I have m times m. There's now 2 of them, so we're going to have 6m to the second power. Okay, now this box here, 2m times -4. 2 times -4 is -8, but we got to keep this m. Okay, bottom row, have positive 5 times 3m. That gives me 15m. And last box, we have 5 times -4, and that gives me -20. So when you write your answer, you want to combine like terms. And what you should notice here is that this diagonal, they are like terms because they both have m. This first one doesn't count because that's m2. So when I write this, I'm going to write 6m to the second power. That's the only thing to the second power. But now these two that I circled, we're going to combine. 15 minus 8 gives me positive 7. So it'll be plus 7m. And then that minus 20 at the end. That's our final answer. Okay, next one says find the area of a rectangle. So they give us a rectangle here and they give us some measurements. Now, area of a rectangle, the formula for that is always going to be length times width. So you can think of this first one as our length and this second one as our width. So all we're going to do here is multiply these two things together. So I'll have 6m minus 5 times m plus 3. So I'm getting those measurements from here, 6m minus 5, m plus 3. So it's exactly like this one here. We could use box method again if you would like, but just to show y'all different methods, I'm going to use double distribution. So we're going to take this first term, 6m, we're going to write it. That needs to get multiplied to the entire second binomial, so I'm going to write that in parentheses. Okay, then our minus 5 also needs to get multiplied to the entire second binomial. So I'm going to write minus 5 and then that second binomial. Okay, so let's do that distribution. 6m times m is now just 6m to the second power. And 6m times 3 is positive 18m. Negative 5 times m is negative 5m. And negative 5 times 3 is negative 15. Now the 2 in the middle, they both have m. They are like terms, so we can combine it. So our final answer would be 6m squared. But positive 18 minus 5 is going to give us positive 13m. And then keep that minus 15 from the end. So that would be the area of that rectangle. Okay, our next problem, number 7, it says factor out the GCF from the given binomial. So GCF stands for greatest common factor. When you are doing greatest common factor, you're looking for the biggest number that will divide both of them. So I have negative 16 and positive 12. They're both even, so I know I can divide by 2, but there's an even bigger number that will divide both of them. So for this one, I suggest that you use your calculator to help you. For GCF, that's menu 25. They actually call it GCD, but it's the same thing. It gives you parentheses like this. You're just going to type in those two numbers there with a comma. So do 16, comma 12 and see what it gives you. So when I do it, it actually gives me 4. So even though they could both be divided by 2, 4 is the bigger number that also divides both of them. The other thing that I notice, so I'm just going to write it like this, GCD. So I know 4. The other thing that I notice is that they both have letters. They both have N. You always take the one with a smaller exponent. So this one doesn't have an exponent. We're going to do that. And one last thing, whatever the sign is of the first one, so see how that first one is negative, then your GCD also needs to be negative. So I know that my greatest common factor here is negative 4n. I'm going to go ahead and write that down. But it says to factor it out. So that means that they want you to divide both of those terms by negative 4n. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's put a line underneath it. That way we can remember. So negative 16 divided by negative 4 now gives me positive 4. And then n squared divided by n, it just goes down a power. So it'll be regular n. Then the second part, positive 12 divided by negative 4 is negative 3. And n divided by n, they basically just cancel out. So there's no more n in that second term. This would be our final answer. So you have to find your greatest common factor and then also divide by that. Okay, let's turn to the back. Next one, number 9, says write the expression 2x squared minus 9x plus 10 in factored form. Factored form means it wants the two sets of parentheses, just like that, right? But we're going to fill them in to see what needs to go in there. Always check to see if these numbers have a greatest common factor. So 2, 9, and 10. So while 2 and 10 are even, 9 is odd, so there is no greatest common factor here. So we can go ahead and label it. 2 is A, negative 9 is B, and 10 is C. So always start by multiplying A times C. So for us, 2 times 10 is 20. And now we're going to list out all the ways that you can multiply and get 20. So there's 1 times 20, 2 times 10, and 4 times 5. Okay, so here's the trick. It needs to now add, so it needs to have a sum of b. So in this case, -9. 1 plus 20 is 21. 2 plus 10 is 12. 4 plus 5, that is 9, but that's +9, and we need to be negative. So the way we can fix it is make both negative. So -4 times -5 gives me +20, but when I add them, gives me -9. So I'm going to use those two numbers. So we're going to rewrite this. 2x squared stays the same. But -9x, we're going to replace using these two numbers. So -4x, -5x, and last, that +10 stays the way it is, +10. So you look at the first group, so just the first two, and you find the greatest common factor. So you could use your calculator for this, menu 25, and type in the numbers 2 and 4. And the biggest number we can divide by is 2. But in that first group, you're always going to be able to divide by a variable as well. So in this case, x. So let's write down 2x, and then in parentheses, we're going to write down what happens when we divide. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and then x squared divided by x is x. So that should be a 1x, but we don't really write that one, so I'm just going to write the x. Then here, -4 divided by 2 is -2. And x divided by x, they cancel each other out. Okay, then the second group here, they don't have a letter in common, but they can be divided by the same thing. In this case, they can be divided by 5. So you always have to decide on your own, should I leave it as a +5 or should I change it to a negative? It is always going to be whatever the first term of the group is. So since that first one is negative, we're going to divide by a negative. That makes a big difference because then you write -5. And in parentheses, we say what happens when we divide. -5 divided by -5 is +1, but then I have to keep that x. And +10 divided by -5 is -2. Now, if you did this correctly, what's in the parentheses should be the same for both of them. That's going to be your first factor, x minus 2. And then what's not in the parentheses, so the greatest common factors of both sets, that is going to be your second factor, 2x minus 5. That is that polynomial written in factored form. And remember, it could be in any order. So if they put the 2x minus 5 first, and then they put x minus 2, same thing. It's okay if they have it in a different order, as long as it's the same binomials. Okay, let's look at our next one. It says the expression m squared plus 3m minus 10 can be written in factored form as m minus 2 m plus k. What is the value of k? So they're saying that this, if you factor it, it's going to give you two sets of parentheses like we know it would. They did half of it for you. They tell you one of them is m minus 2, but the other one, they use a k instead of a number. They want you to figure out what number that should be. So you could just get that original and factor it like the way you normally would. So I have an invisible 1 as my a. 3 is b. And then negative 10 is c. So normally we would multiply ac. So in this case, we have 1 times negative 10. That's negative 10. And we need to figure out all the ways to multiply and get 10. So 1 times 10, 2 times 5. And I think that's it. But if I multiply positive numbers, I'm going to get a positive number. This is negative. So you could think of those first numbers as being negative, or I'm going to use the same numbers again. What if it's the second number that's negative and the first is positive? So all I did was kind of switch what was positive and what was negative. Out of these four options, I needed to equal b. b is positive 3. So when I go through and I actually add all of these up, I'm going to move this over. So if I were to add these up, that gives me 9. So that's not it. This gives me 3, and that's what b is. So I actually think that one is already it. The other one gives me -9 and -3. So just be careful because this one here is almost 3. It's negative, but we needed it to be positive. So we know that we're going to use these two numbers. So normally we would do this long way, the way we did here. We would split it up. But on this case, see that -2? That's what they have in the parentheses here. So what does K have to be? Has to be the one that matches with that too. So it has to be 5. K would equal 5. So that factoring there would be m minus 2, m plus 5. So on the test, there is one like that, where it just asks you what K should be, and then it gives you a blank space. You have to write in what you think it should be. So in this case, it would be 5. Okay, and then last one for today. The area of a rectangle is 5x squared plus 13x plus 6 square units. What are the dimensions of the rectangle? So we know that area of a rectangle is length times width. So they're telling us we already know the area. The area is 5x squared plus 13x plus 6. We want to figure out what would the length be and what would the width be. So isn't that just factoring? That's what we've been doing. So we look at this here. We look to see if we can factor anything out, which we cannot. So we're going to start with A is 5, B is 13, and C is 6. So AC, 5 times 6 is 30. So we can do 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, or 5 times 6. So the way we know which one to pick is it needs to equal what B is here. It needs to equal positive 13. So when we add, that's going to be this third option. That's the one that equals 13. Okay, so let's do our rewriting. 5x squared, but that B that I circled, we're going to use these two numbers instead. So plus 3x plus 10x plus 6. Our first group, they're always going to have a letter in common, so always x. But looking at the numbers, 5 and 3, they don't have anything in common, so it's just the x. So x, and when we divide by that, we'll get 5x plus 3. So all that happened is that the x's went down by a power. Okay, then second group, they don't have a letter in common, but they both can be divided by 2. Since that first term is positive, we're going to leave it as positive 2. So write down plus 2. Then in parentheses, let's divide. 10 divided by 2 is 5, but got to keep that x. And 6 divided by 2 gives us 3. Okay, and like we did before, whatever's in the parentheses should be the same for both, and that's going to be our first factor. Only we're talking about dimensions of a rectangle, so that could be, say, like the length. So that would be 5x plus 3 units by, then the other factor is everything that's on the outside, so the x plus 2. And that could be like the width, so by x plus 2 units. And if they do it the other way, that's perfectly fine. It's the exact same thing. So they might put the x plus 2 first, but it doesn't matter what order they put it in, as long as their factors are the same as yours. Okay, and that is our review for today. I want you guys to go through all of the even ones and get an answer for those. Make sure you box in your answers so I know what your answers are, and this is going to be taken for a grade. If you have any questions, let me know.